My name is Rüdiger Sesemann, and I'm talking here now as the Dean of the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence. This is the fourth time we are holding the Distinguished Enwezor Lecture, so it's already become a tradition. We introduced this together with Iwa Leverhaus back in 2020. The first was online. And then we had two more lectures on site, and I'm extremely pleased that we are able to convene here again on site with an exciting speaker. I want to acknowledge also our interpreters. We have the international sign language interpreters with us. So this is going to be recorded and archived. This is also
Bonsoir à tout le monde,
tradition
nous avons un
I
plaisir de
hold
vous avoir
dearly.
ici.
That was
La dernière fois,
initiated
on était
also
en
by
ligne,
our
c'était
colleagues in
en
the Iwa House.
2020-2021, et nous
And
sommes heureux de vous avoir ici cette fois-ci.
yeah,
J'aimerais
I'm not
bien
going to
vous
take much
accueillir.
more of
Je
your
suis le
time.
président de Cluster
I only want
Africa
to say
Multiple Cluster of
perhaps one
Excellence.
thing before Katharina Fink will introduce the speaker. This is the first time we are having an Enwezor
Dr. Katharina Fink va
of
introduire
African
comme
descent. And
la présentatrice, la
I think
première
it's really
présentatrice.
significant that we are in the UN decade for people of African descent to acknowledge this also in our work.
C'est vraiment
Africa
un plaisir et c'est
Cluster
très
of
important que
Excellence.
nous
So I
réunissons pour
notice I'm
cette
also moved
présentation cette fois-ci.
about that and very pleased and would like to ask you to give a very, very warm welcome.
Je suis vraiment très heureuse et je vous présente toutes mes salutations et j'espère que nous allons passer un bon moment ensemble.
Pleasure to introduce our speaker of honor because it's really a big honor. Thank you, Katharina, for making the way. So, dear Katharina Warda, dear colleagues and friends, it is such a pleasure to
Chère
be
Katharina Warda, chers collègues, chers
about
amis,
curation, about
c'est un tel plaisir de pouvoir se réunir librement pour réfléchir à la conservation, à la mise en place
Roy, the
d'un
novelist
espace
and
pour
activist,
les œuvres, les personnes et les histoires
such
pour
thing as
partager.
voiceless. There's only the deliberately silenced or the preferred.
Arrondie d'œuvres romancières et militantes a déclaré un jour que les sans-voix
And I
n'existaient pas.
invited to lead
Il n'y
us
a que des personnes délibérément réduites au
archival
silence
insights.
ou de préférences non attendues.
The honor tonight, Katharina Warda.
J'aime l'osé
Archival
politique de cette
insights, her
citation et je vous
narrative
invite à nous conduire directement au travail dans l'impulsion archivistique de notre
From here,
oratrice
she
d'honneur,
courageously
Katharina Warda.
archives, follows
Sa
materials,
pulsion
lets herself be
archivistique,
guided by
son élan narratif se
I'm
situe
very happy that
directement
we can
dans le
share the
travail.
evening together at Iva Leverhaus here, and I'm really glad that
À
Iva
partir de
Leverhaus
là, elle plonge
is
courageusement
space to
dans
meet
les
and
archives,
connect.
elle
That's
suit
why
les matériaux,
she
se laisse guider
and
par les liens. Et je
I
suis
learned
très
about
heureuse de
Katharina
passer la
Warda's
soirée
work in
ensemble
two ways.
et
First,
d'écouter les histoires ensemble.
because of the
J'ai
work
découvert le
itself.
travail de
A
Katharina
powerful
Warda de
work as a
deux.
public speaker, journalist, and as a
Tout
creative
d'abord, bien sûr,
in line with
à cause du travail lui-même,
like
sa
Audre
voix
Lorde,
puissante en tant
Peter, and other
qu'oratrice,
parts of
journaliste,
tonight.
archiviste et
Because of
créatrice,
her
dans la
insistence
lignée de
on the
penseurs
Black East
et de
German
créateurs comme Audre
and
Lorde,
work against
Épée
the
Kidnappé
violence of the white
et
art
d'autres Berlinois à temps
and
partiel.
selectiveness,
En
sorry,
raison de
of
son
West German,
insistance sur
often
les
dubbed
récits de
German
l'Allemagne de l'Est,
culture.
noire,
To name a thing by its name is a decolonial activity, and of such stature, to my mind, is Katharina's work. I want to shed light on her work as a freelance author with a focus on East Germany, marginalized identities, racism, classism, and punk. Since 2021, she has been a member of the advisory board of Kein Schlussstrich, super important, a nationwide theater project on the NSU complex. In her project Dunkel Deutschland, I'm saying that in German because we need to say that in German. So Dunkel Deutschland, or for the English speakers, Dark Germany. She explores the post-reunification period from the social margins and illuminates blind spots in German, often West German historiography based on her own experience as a Black East German woman growing up in the GDR and after 1989. A very recent project really needs to be seen soon when it's done, and hopefully can be screened at Iwa House soonest. Our sister Angela, a film about the enthusiastic solidarity movement for Black civil rights activist Angela Davis in the GDR in the moment of the 1970s, who attracted tens of thousands of people and so on and so on. Katharina can talk much more about that, but we want to congratulate her on the awards she has been winning for a pitch of a film already. So the first moment for applause is now. But beyond all of that, the quality of the work, the courage, and so on, I want to come to a second connection to Katharina Warda's work, which is by warmth and by closeness and the beauty of weaving together people, spaces, and ideas. The fact that our shared contact, our friend or nearly friend, I don't know, Manja Prekes, author and artist who has been doing exceptional work for the memory of our dear anarchist Erich Mühsam, our poet and visionary who was killed by the Nazis 90 years ago on the 10th of July in 1934 in the concentration camp of Oranienburg. Manja brought all of us together in order to make something out of this. And this leads to another part of the decolonial curatorial effort, I think, in the light of which we gather. And perhaps this is the core of the work, the love for complicated truth, for telling stories of violence and holding space for stories to unfold is an act of love, and that's not an easy one. It's a labor of love indeed, as an exhibition at the Joburg Art Gallery, curated by Gavin Tobo, was titled. James Baldwin, who I'd love to cite here, the great American author, writes in his work, The Fire Next Time, that love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within. I use the word, Baldwin speaking, love, here not merely in the personal sense, but as a state of being or a state of grace, not in the infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth. So in that sense of making each other learn and grow and share with one another what is available to us, Manja Prekes, who we praise all the time, connected Katharina Warda, Iwa House, the Cluster of Excellence, and the Societal Arts Academy, and asking us to get in touch to join forces. And so, thanks to hard work and to friendship, we're here together, and Katharina Warda is doing research on her father's story in a place in Johannesburg, in Sophia Town, which is adorned, sorry, I love this connection, which is adorned by a mural done by our beloved artist and friend Yassine Badzoui, who's based in Marrakesh right now, but whose mural Flying Wall has been a core element of Iwa House since 2016. If you haven't seen it before, I take you there afterwards because it's quite important. So in the light of these networks, we are eager to listen to Stilo Live sonic offering for Katharina Warda later tonight, which she's sending to us from Accra. So we weave the net tight so that even in a dire, unbearably unimaginative time, marked and bruised by what my partner in crime, the chef and curator and artist Danza Sandile calls the poverty of ideas. We are not alone, and we bank on the potential of intentional connections rather than institutional ones. So learning from network ecosystems, from mushrooms, coral reefs, and others that Adrienne Marie Brown is talking about so beautifully in her book Emergent Strategy, that is a good way to refer back to the reason we are here, to celebrate the perhaps still unseen connections, the freedom of thought, and the commitment to complexity that Katharina Warda's work stands for, and the attention that her ideas demand for. There's this one line in the oeuvre of Okwui Enwezor, who we donate, not donate, but who we, like, I don't know, who we dedicate this lecture, thank you, and this gathering to, in which he speaks about staying unaffiliated, as free from sticky institutional connections as possible, as independent as possible, but mostly working out spaces for stories to grow, to intersect, to breathe, and to claim their space, untamed, bold, shy, whatever form the story as life calls for. Such is the care that Katharina Warda's practice lives by. We cannot wait to see and to feel and to experience the fruit of her research on the roots of exiled activists, the connections and the new paths and presents and futures emerging from that research. From all of us gathered in Joburg, because there's a lot of people listening in Johannesburg, from all of us meeting here right now and listening wherever in the world, thanks for the hard work, Katharina, and thanks for spending time, which is the greatest gift, and we're very aware of that. So we're very much looking forward to hearing your words now. Please come. Second thing for applause.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? No. Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much. It was a wonderful, amazingly beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. Such an honor to speak today. I wrote quite a long text for today, so please bear with me. I also brought some pictures to make it more lively, maybe. And I will just go right into it to have enough time in the end to have maybe a conversation about what we heard. Invisible History, Story, Exploring Black East German History. 3 years ago, I published a personal essay in the prominent German newspaper, Die Zeit, at the time, that started like this. It took me... Okay. It took me 35 years to understand that I'm not alone. Maybe I never was. Who knows? Who can tell? Because my people are the invisible ones. That essay was one of 4 personal reflections on identity by fellow East Germans, and yet it stood out. Because my biographical introduction broke with an so far unquestioned narrative regarding the imagery of East Germans, which sounded like that. I was born in 1985 in a small town in the GDR. My mother is a white German factory worker, and my father was Black and a South African anti-apartheid activist who found political refuge in the GDR. That was no coincidence, since the ANC, the African National Congress, the anti-apartheid organization around freedom fighters like Nelson Mandela, was highly supported by the GDR and other East Bloc countries. Simultaneously, the ANC was disregarded as a terrorist threat by Western countries, such as West Germany, that profited highly from the ultra-racist South African apartheid system. Nevertheless, I still would never get to know my father because my parents' biracial relationship was not appreciated in my home country, the GDR. As a result of my mother getting pregnant with me and refusing to have an abortion, my parents were pressured to break up, and my father was supposed to be expelled from the country immediately. However, I grew up in blissful ignorance of all that, because it was nothing you would speak of at this time or even now. Hence, my typical GDR childhood just unfolded like a cliché. In the autumn of 1989, I was 5 years old, a dormant child in kindergarten, Schlafkind. I was making my first attempts at reading in Gummibär magazines and dreaming of becoming a GDR pioneer. Then the wall came down, and my life, like that of probably all East Germans, was turned completely upside down. After the first year of euphoria and consumer wonderland, the years followed that I still remember as Die Wende. In my essay for Die Zeit, I continued talking about the 90s, with descriptions of the enormous increase of unemployment in East Germany, which heavily affected my mother and my stepdad. I wrote about social decline and inner German devaluations, and maybe even discrimination towards East Germans, and how, with the end of the Cold War and the victory of the West over the East, most East German knowledge and experiences suddenly counted for nothing. I stopped thinking about kindergarten years and Gummibär magazines to embrace a new system as my new reality. My essay would not have stood out if it had only been about that. Or if so, then only as a reflection of its time. My essay was published in 2021, the year after the two big German anniversaries, 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 2019, and in 2020, 30 years since the unification of the two Germanys. Two anniversaries that were highly marked by a narrational shift towards new East German imageries shaped by East German perspectives, and not by the West German gaze like before. In my essay, I used my naive childhood memories to get to the heart of a feeling many East Germans can relate to, and draw attention to problematic areas. The end of the GDR was an important and welcome historical marker. There is no doubt about it. At the same time, German unification took place under a power imbalance that was hardly ever discussed in German mainstream media and public discourses for the longest time. And that is still inscribed in German society today. Structural wage differences, unequal distribution of wealth, and neglect and stereotyping of East German history are main results of this power imbalance between the former two Germanys. Growing up as an East German, my history and culture was only represented in the media by a very few topics. The political discourse around the Stasi, the East German Secret Service, was one of them. Others were the one-party dictatorship of the National Party, SED, and the movements opposing the system. In a pop cultural context, East Germans were more often than not portrayed as comedic figures, like in the film Go Trabigo and Cindy aus Marzahn. I brought two pictures of that. Maybe you remember, maybe not. Growing up as a Black East German woman, I was quite aware of the disrespect and the gap between those representations and my own experiences. However, for me, this gap did not only occur between West and East Germany and through a Western gaze. This gap also existed and still exists for me as an East German among other East Germans, or more precisely, as a Black East German among other East Germans who automatically think of East German society as homogeneously white. The typical East German may have to face a stereotypical image in Germany. However, they do have an image. In the same way, Black East Germans like me and other East Germans of color do not even exist. Not in the eye of other East Germans, not in the eye of West Germans, and not in international perceptions. But why is it so? When we talk about Black German history, which happens far too rarely in Germany and is by no means a matter of fact, we automatically talk about West German history. In East German history, it is in its one-dimensional representation, the existence of Black people and people of color and their history is completely erased. The two identities, being East German and being Black, simply do not exist in their intersection in the public eye. Hence, my essay for Die Zeit stood out, simply because I do not exist in the eyes of Germans. Yet, the GDR did have a complex history of immigration and a big ambiguous relation towards race, racism, and Blackness, To better understand Black East German history, please allow me to take one more historical step back. And let's have a very brief look into pre-Cold War Black German history. When it comes to tracking Black lives in East Germany, it is not that easy. The area that is now Germany has been shaped by Black life and Black influences for hundreds of years, but it has never regarded itself as diverse. So Germany has never regarded itself as diverse. Racism has been an inseparable part of German history and society since colonial times. As a result, traces of Black lives has disappeared throughout history and have also been actively suppressed and destroyed again and again. A brutal culmination of this whitewashing of a diverse German society was the Holocaust. Therein, Nazi Germany murdered an estimated total of 17 million people. Among them are 6 million Jews, 7 million Soviet civilians, up to 250,000 disabled people, 250,000 Sinti and Roma, but also hundreds of homosexuals, as well as Serbian and Polish civilians, Soviet prisoners of war, political prisoners, people affected by classism, and religiously persecuted people. Black Germans do not figure in this cruel statistic. Nevertheless, they were affected by the extermination by the Nazis. Almost forgotten today as a forced sterilization of hundreds of mixed-race Germans during the Nazi era. An estimate of 2,000 more people of African descent died in Nazi concentration camps. There are no figures of the numerous Afro-American prisoners of war and African soldiers of the French, Belgian, and British colonial troops that were killed. Further, it is impossible to quantify the many lives that were prevented by the Nuremberg race laws, which came into force in 1935. The laws outlawed relationships and marriages between white and Black people in Germany. Those few Black people who survived and stayed in Germany had to face massive discrimination, which made a future in Germany extremely difficult. By the end of World War II and the end of the Nazi era, Germany turned out as a very homogeneous society in which Black lives and Black history was nearly extinct. As a result of the Second World War, the two German states came into being. And both took a different path in coming to terms with their own history. West Germany established a leading narrative of 0 hour, Stunde Null. It marked the beginning of a new era in which Nazi history was left behind without having the Germans reflect on their own ideological involvement. This went along with a rather symbolic and in many respects inconsistent act of denazification. A fact that was sharply criticized by a younger generation of West Germans in the 1960s and 70s, and by the other state, the GDR. The GDR, which emerged from the Soviet occupation zone, was a state modeled on socialist principles. It regarded itself as an anti-fascist state and celebrated denazification very publicly and more emphatically in many state institutions, although by no means consistently or without contradictions. These contradictions are also reflected in the way racism was dealt with and the visibility and invisibility of Black lives within the GDR. So let's talk a little bit about anti-racism as a state's doctrine and Black lives in the GDR. In contrast to West Germany, the GDR openly addressed their fascist and colonial past and racism and publicly turned away from it. If in West Germany, racism was considered to be a condition that was overcome with Stunde Null, 0 hour, an object of the past, of the Nazis, not of the Germans after 1945. Racism in the GDR, however, was considered to be a mere product of capitalism based on Marxist theories. And since the GDR regarded itself as a socialist state, racism, according to the head of the state, Erich Honecker, consequently lacked an ideological foundation, hence was not possible to exist in East Germany. Racism was considered to have been abolished, but similarly to West Germany, it was just not dealt with. Rather, speaking about racism became subordinated to and instrumentalized by the state doctrine of the GDR. Also, topics such as colonialism and German fascism were an important part of school education. Anti-racism became an ideological tool to assert one's own culture and moral superiority in the Cold War, and to address the misguidedness of the Western world, especially when it came to West Germany and the United States. However, outside the GDR, socialist, Marxist, and anti-capitalist idea became inseparable from numerous anti-racist and anti-colonial freedom struggles and civil rights movements around the world during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. For example, Nelson Mandela, as the most prominent member of the South African ANC, represented an idea of social justice that in many ways resembled socialist ideas. During his life, there was also a repeated speculation as to whether he had at times been a member of the South African Communist Party or not. While the ANC's anti-apartheid movement was considered as a terrorist organization in most Western countries, Mandela and the ANC received a strong support from socialist countries such as Cuba and East Germany. In the US, socialist, Marxist, and anti-capitalist thoughts resonated among Black civil rights movements. Although this Black radicalism is hardly remembered today. For instance, Martin Luther King Jr. regularly spoke of the entanglement of racism and capitalism as tools of oppression in his speeches. Others embraced a more direct Marxist or socialist mindset, like for instance, Kwame Ture or Angela Davis. The GDR supported many international struggles and maintained relationships with comrades around the world, including the United States. East Germany published a relatively large number of books, for instance, by James Baldwin, and orchestrated public state receptions with Black activists and artists like Ralph Abernathy, Harry Belafonte, and Poland Islander Robeson. In the GDR, they became celebrated stars and symbols of the so-called, in quotes, different America that reached a climate with the reception of Angela Davis in the GDR. And this is a song I won't sing now, but I will read the lyrics and maybe for this occasion, the English lyrics. It is just a simple translation by myself. So the song is originally in German. It was a song by the music group Uwe Schikora Combo and was published in 1972. Let's read the English text. Oh, Angela, you live trapped and no tremble, no fear. You are so young, you are beautiful. Before what judges you shall stand. And if yesterday threatens you with murder, the future has the last word. It sounds very different when it's sung in German, but nevertheless, this is how the Uwe Schikora Combo sings in 1972. When the band wrote Oh Angela, Angela Davis was in jail for allegedly supporting terrorism. In the early 1970s, she was an author, a Marxist, and a member of the Black Panther Party. Davis is a highly gifted intellectual. Her mentor in her student days was the German philosopher Herbert Marcuse. When her indictment threatened her with the death penalty, intellectuals around the world showed solidarity with Angela Davis, including Heinrich Böll, Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, Yoko Ono, and John Lennon. In the GDR, the national demonstration of solidarity erupted and was called 1 Million Roses for Angela. Thousands of GDR citizens wrote letters, postcards, and painted roses for the so-called, in quotes, Black sister Angela, publicly urging her release from prison. After Davis was acquitted in 1972, even the GDR leadership was surprised by her big reception at the airport Schönefeld in East Berlin. Instead of 3,000 announced visitors, almost 50,000 people showed up. A sea of camera, banners, umbrellas, and bouquets of flowers. They surrounded the landing plane, cheered, greeted in ecstatic chants one of the GDR's greatest political idols, the so-called Our Black Sister Angela. A little later, there were even 200,000 people in Leipzig. Davis publicly met Erich Honecker, the leader of the state at this time, and other GDR leaders. She received an honorary doctorate from the Karl Marx University in Leipzig and became an honorary citizen of the city of Magdeburg. Her portrait graced magazines, postcards, and even statues were built. She became a superstar in the GDR and returned to the country 1 year later as part of the so-called World Youth Game Festival in 1973, a festival against imperialism and racism, and an event of superlatives. For 9 days, around 8 million people from the GDR and 140 other countries came together in East Berlin. Davis was the most prominent guest at the so-called Woodstock of the East and gave a speech in German. Black East German and cultural scholar Peggy Piesche remembers this time as follows. It was a few moments in my childhood when I felt Black lives mattered, were valuable, that Black lives were valued. It wasn't until much later that I learned the actual history of the Black civil rights movement in school. In her memory, the sad flip side of this hypervisibility of Davis and Black struggles becomes clear. It was temporary, barely existed outside of state representation, and found little resonance in the everyday life and mindset of the general population. The GDR's approach to racism was characterized by a unique mixture of hypervisibility of anti-racism and Blackness, as described in the example of the perception of Angela Davis on the one hand. But on the other hand, however, it was characterized by the extreme invisibility of Black lives and experiences within East Germany, or even the denial of such. As remarkable as the public and clear support of anti-racist struggles by the GDR was, still racism always remained a cruel phenomenon of Western countries, according to GDR narratives, which therefore had to be fought in the Cold War. Meanwhile, the GDR's own racism and the experiences of Black people inside the GDR remained unspoken, both by the state and in everyday life. So have a look into race and Blackness in East Germany and what was it about. Not only is racism discussed as a foreign phenomenon in the GDR, the same is true for its individuals. Black Americans like Angela Davis and Paul Robeson were celebrated as stars because they were political activists in a foreign country and because they were foreigners, and thus did not challenge the GDR self-image as an anti-racist but white society. This not only stands in stark contrast to the anti-racist narratives of the state, but also to the fact that the GDR had a complex history of immigration and that remains relatively unseen until today. Since there was hardly any Black life in Germany after the Second World War, Black communities only re-emerged slowly in the course of immigration. Even though the GDR is now considered a small, homogeneously white country, it had a complex and continuous immigration history. This was mostly tied to the state agreements. So one can identify three dominant groups of Black immigrants. First, Black people came to the GDR as international students from countries such as Congo, Senegal, and the US, and many, many more. Or they came as political immigrants. Political immigrants is a GDR term for political activists who found refuge in the GDR. This included, for example, members of the South African ANC or the Namibian Southwest Africa People's Organization, SWAPO. Both groups enjoyed a relatively high standing for immigrants and brought foreign and trade capital to the GDR, which was striving for international recognition. Labor migrants created a third group, the so-called contract workers from Cuba, Algeria, Mozambique, and Angola, made up the largest part of the Black population in the GDR. In addition, there were other but less numerous paths for Black people to enter East Germany. And of course, there were new generations of children born as Black East Germans. However, despite the differences, many of them had to face the same experiences in the GDR when it came to race. Either their Blackness was described as foreign and consequently they were regarded as foreigners, despite being German or not. Or Blackness was not addressed at all. I, for example, as a Black East German woman who was born German, had to face both experiences all the time, being seen as a foreigner or being denied a Black identity and my experiences with racism. Similar stories are told by other Black people about the GDR. Instead of representation, they experienced invisibility, discrimination, and violence. Contract workers were the most vulnerable group to this. They were under strong state control by the GDR and their home countries. They were segregated and often housed on the outskirts of the city, far away from the GDR population. And their work has been heavily exploited. Paulino Miguel, who was a contract worker in the GDR, coined the term double wall in this context. He's referring to the Berlin Wall as a border between East and West, and to the social wall within East Germany between citizens and immigrants. Many Black people experienced a high level of racism that was said to not officially exist in East Germany. Miguel again recalls the racism was actually undeniable, although everything was done to keep us out of the everyday life in the GDR. This act of keeping people out of everyday life in the GDR is one of many factors East German history of color remains invisible. Black lives and Black history officially only took place at the state level of representation. The actual reality of Black people in East Germany was kept invisible as possible and was rarely discussed. Nevertheless, there were interactions of Black people and white GDR citizens in everyday life. The scholars Marcia Schenk and Johanna Wenzel point out in their article, Liebe in Zeiten der Vertragsarbeit, Love in Time of Contract Work, that interracial friendships and love relationships did, of course, exist in the GDR, though they weren't appreciated, and to use the reoccurring phrase, they were not seen gladly, wurden nicht gern gesehen. Not seen gladly or not gladly seen is a phrase that I hear again and again in interviews in this context. Not gladly seen, even linguistically, reflects invisibility. The phrase also finds its way into the documentary film Becoming Black by Ines Johnson Spain, and finds an almost grotesque materialization in it. In her documentary film Becoming Black, the director and protagonist, Ines Johnson Spain, talks about her growing up as a Black girl in the GDR. She grows up as the only Black person in a family of white people. Her immediate environment is also only white. Her parents tell her it is a genetic coincidence that she is Black. Otherwise, the topic is completely taboo. It is not until she reaches puberty that she finds out that she actually has just a different father who is also Black. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, she finds him out and makes him a part of her life. In the film, the director confronts her family with the life of her childhood and breaks the silence about being Black. A powerful film that shows by an extreme example and from the perspective of a Black East German woman, how Blackness was dealt with by GDR citizens. It wasn't dealt with at all. It was not part of this GDR self-image to be diverse or include people of color. Let's have a brief look outside or to this time after the GDR into the so-called Baseballschlägerjahre, baseball bat years. Spain Johnson left the GDR in the 1980s and moved to West Germany. The Black people who stayed had to face an even more devastating attempt of erasure by the end of the GDR in 1989 and 1990. I've already suggested that racism in the GDR existed not only through erasure, instrumentalization, and tokenism of Blackness, but also in racist hostility, insults, and physical violence. Neo-Nazi groups also existed in the underground of the GDR. With the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, racist and right-wing violence exploded on the streets of East Germany. The night of German unification, the night of October 2 till October 3, 1990, can be seen as symbolic in this way. While millions of people celebrated the unification of the two German states that night, right-wing riots occurred in more than 30 German cities, 20 of which were in East Germany, according to the counts of the online initiative 2. Oktober 90, it's October 2nd, 90. Over 1,500 neo-Nazis were said to have been active that night. In 14 of the cities, larger, sometimes pogrom-like attacks with mass participation happened. Those attacks of the night of the unification were only the start of an enormous wave of racist and right-wing violence in the 1990s and early 2000s. These attacks were primarily carried out by neo-Nazis, but also involved broad participation by the rest of the population and were further incited by the media. This culminated in the racist pogroms in Hoyerswerda in 1991 and Rostock-Lichtenhagen 1992. In Hoyerswerda, for example, neo-Nazis with the support of up to 500 supporters from the normal population, like they call it, Mittige Gesellschaft, attacked a refugee shelter and a home for former contract workers with stones, steel balls, and Molotov cocktails. It was not until the 7th day of the pogrom that the authorities evacuated the building. But instead of protecting the victims, they implemented what the perpetrators had previously demanded with shouts of foreigners out, Ausländer raus. They arranged for the victims to be bussed out of the city and many of them of the country. Similar scenes took place in Lichtenhagen. This time up to 3,000 people were involved in the attacks on an asylum shelter and a home for former Vietnamese contract workers, which lasted several days. The pogrom reached its cruel climax when the house, which still sheltered over 100 people, was set on fire by a racist mob. The police and authorities offered hardly any help. Only by the initiatives of the people inside the house, there were no deaths that night. This was not the case in many other cases of racist violence of that time, which today is called the baseball bat years, Baseballschlägerjahre. In media representation, I will come to the end. In media representation, East Germany is henceforth referred to as the Brown East, der braune Osten, or sometimes Dunkeldeutschland. Brown was the political color of the Nazis. With the metaphor Brown East, racist violence finally becomes visible in East Germany after reunification. Paradoxically, however, similar to the GDR before, it becomes not visible as a phenomenon of its own or a German phenomenon, but rather as a foreign phenomenon. With the end of the Cold War, East Germany emerged as a loser of the Cold War, and inside Germany, it quickly assumes the role of the so-called other Germany, a bad counterpart to the supposedly superior West Germany, the supposedly actual Germany. East Germany was usually portrayed as less democratic than its Western counterpart, culturally backwards, and homogeneously white, in contrast to the metropolitan and diverse West Germany. And in this case, not only the actual diverse history of East Germany regarding its Black individuals disappeared, similarly to the times of the GDR, but also East Germany's formerly very visible international support of anti-racist movements and its history of immigration completely disappears in order to uphold a more favorable image of West Germany. A continuation of invisibility of Black East German history and East German history of color beyond the time of the GDR and the Cold War. I, for example, had to learn about my father's history twice. On the one hand, he, as a Black South African man who immigrated to the GDR, was invisible because his personal story was silenced in the GDR. Secondly, the history of the ANC and its relationship to the GDR, as well as other international Black and anti-racist alliances, got lost in the consequence of how the ending of the Cold War was handled. Conveniently, the support and capitalization of the apartheid system by West Germany also disappeared and is hardly discussed today, except by those who are affected by it. In 2008, a collective of South Africans who fell victim to the apartheid regime sued several large German banks and companies that had profited from the racist system in violation of UN agreements and had kept the system financially alive for a long time. This is a South African story that urgently needs to be discussed in Europe and Germany. And it is also a German story that got easily forgotten with the double invisibility that Black East German history has to face. This is also one story I address in my work as an author and filmmaker. This is my father's story and hence also mine. And it is one of the many Black East German stories that will be forgotten soon if we do not start to explore stories like that and make Black East German history visible on a larger scale. The history of Black East Germans I presented today has not been written down so far and is merely a starting point. It is a collection of academic work, cultural artifacts, and oral histories intentionally curated to fill the historically and politically created gap of Black East German histories. Art and an intentional approach to curation have the power to find and tell the stories that have been forgotten by time and politics. They have the power to dignify where it was denied before. And they have the power to create counter stories that challenge current political and historical narratives. In my case, the exploration of Black East German stories of color, and life of color in general in the countries of the former Eastern Bloc creates a strong counter-narratives to the current uprise of the extreme right. Right-wing organizations in Germany and the countries of the former East Bloc are collectively painting a picture of a supposedly original, pure European past without diversity and anti-racist struggles. The international right is networking through this false historical image as a common ideal. Within Germany, especially East Germany, the far right is currently gaining enormous popularity. The right-wing party AfD is achieving top results as the strongest and second strongest party in numerous federal states and is a hot candidate for the upcoming federal elections. Black East German history may seem like a minor subject, nice to have heard of. But if nothing else, current politics should teach us that decisions are made at the social margins and at the expense of minorities, though they will eventually affect all of us. Therefore, I plead for courageously and curiously exploring the untold stories of one's own history, and for implementing curational approaches that are able to challenge dominant narratives and institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katharina Warda. Now is the moment to have discussion, to ask questions, to have a comment. But before that, before we forget, because we forget every year, sorry, but this year we won't forget. Can I have the credit? Because let's we forget, this is an art institution, this is an amazing art space, so okay. Yeah, please do it. That's it. Aha. Here. That's all. That's a lecture from the two. Okay, let me try. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we'll go ahead. This is under the America Evans, different designer axis of Volkswagen trading company is committed to decolonial work, decolonial aesthetics with beautiful information. We did the textile guiding system on the first floor and we especially developed the symbol in honor of Okwui Enwezor. Everybody is speaking in the framework of the next against one. So, Sika Okeka Arudo has one. Jonah Ukeka, wherever she is, has one. Natural Violet has one. Turkish friend in American, the collective of Johanna has one. That's great, that's good. And all of you have one. Thank you so much, Dr. Warda, for this extremely important chapter of journalism, which definitely needs to be addressed. You basically pointed out this role that Angela Davis has played as regards the sort of visualization of blackness in East German state, and how there were discrepancies in how blackness actually featured in East German life, or not featured, as you pointed out very cogently. I'm reminded of how Okwui Enwezor came to Berlin in the 80s, and he, of course, had basically made quite an impact on sort of driving forward the Black German feminist movement, which had a very, very strong West German set of parameters, and the parallel sort of developments with the initiative for people of Black descent, ISD, in the art mentioned Deutschland. So I was just wondering if you could locate certain lessons through Angela Davis's presence in East Germany that have perhaps impacted Black German feminist struggles in the GDR. And we mentioned Peggy's work, and she was very active in ABEGA, which is that Black German feminist movement.
So how do you see Angela Davis's presence and her intellectual work actually sort of feeding into Black East Germany feminist consciousness and work towards visualizing Black East German citizenship? You could speak to that, please. Thank you so much.
So, would you mind going there again? Because otherwise the interpreters don't hear you. So.
Sure.
Thanks.
But I have my anyways. I have my microphone with me, but anyways, okay. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, thank you for this question. It's a very good question, and actually I wanted the same. So my answer would be probably a little bit unsatisfying, because there's not much work done about that. Actually, there's no work done about it, about the impact of Angela Davis and her visits to the GDR on Black lives and on Black heritage. Usually there are some documentaries about her visits, and usually the white East German people, they talk about it now quite a lot because they were so moved writing these postcards. The GDR actually was the biggest country that orchestrated the solidarity campaign. There were almost 1 million letters coming from East Germany. So people like to remember that. Inside the white population, people like to remember that, but also they dismisses the visits of Angela Davis like, oh, it was just a representation of the state. It was not real. So in my movie, which I'm filming right now, this documentary about Angela Davis' visit, we explore this story through the eyes and perspectives of Black East German people who witnessed her at this time. And we asked actually exactly that, what impact had it on them? Did it shape their identity in any way? And of course, it always had an impact on them, but it was very on an individual level. It was more like, wow, I've never seen a person who looks similar to me in such a public role in the GDR. Also, Angela Davis was like a beauty symbol at this time. She was published not only outside the GDR, but very prominent in the GDR. She was a permanent part of beauty magazines. She was praised for her hair, for her beauty all the time. Even this song, she was praised for her beauty. So I think on this level, it had a deep impact, and also from what I hear on the people, like they felt seen, they felt valued, and they felt seen as beautiful for the first time. But it was so far from what I have heard and seen and discovered, it was merely on an individual level. It didn't shape by any means a Black movement in the GDR or a legacy, because that was hardly, this didn't exist it did exist. There were some movements, but they were not, as far as I know, they were not shaped by Angela Davis visits. But on an individual level, it made a huge impact. And I feel like this is something we should still remember. Thank you for this question.
Thank you for a very useful talk. I'm curious to know what you think if socialism and philosophy useful to arguments. We hear a lot that socialism or humanism are useful when it comes to capitalism. So I wonder if socialism or humanism is useful to arguments.
Yeah, that is quite a philosophical question. Well, I would always distinguish the idea of socialism and the practice of the GDR and other so-called socialist countries. They practiced their own idea, which hardly resembled socialism in many parts. However, when we look into history, and also, like I said in my talk, there is a tradition of anti-racist struggles leaning into socialist ideas. And I think it was, historically speaking, it played a huge role to unify people in many parts of the world, in many movements. If socialism as an idea is can be a great impact, or can have a great impact on anti-racism, I don't know. I feel like that is very philosophical. But if you look into the practice, it did shape, it did unify people, and it did strengthen their struggles, their anti-racist struggles. But also there were countries and ruled by so-called socialism, which were devastating. So. But I do see I do see an entanglement between capitalism and racism. That's for sure. So if you want to contradict that as socialism, why not? But I feel like there is a huge entanglement between capitalism and racism.
I hope that I was needed.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to ask, you know, in the summer of 2020, we had the Apple census, and it was published as well. I was just wondering how East German Black sensibilities actually fit into the Apple census. Do you have any information on that? Can you speak to that?
I don't know that.
I'm thinking of the sense of visualizing Black life as part of German history and context. I'm just wondering if there was also consideration of this history in German.
Not that I'm aware of, actually, because this was more the parts of the Apple census I remember were quite current numbers. So I don't know if I can't remember but I think if I would have seen it, I would remember. So I don't think so, but yeah, but I have to look into it again, but as far as I remember, no.
Will not ask this about the question. Yeah, so we have a very long, complicated history of the making of the category of being Black. And it seems that it exists in two extremes. Hyper visible or hyper invisible. What we don't have in the world, what we've never experienced in the world, is what it means to be a normal Black person. And to this day, we're still dealing with these questions, where you could be said, oh, you're just like everyone else. Stop bickering on about this special status. You should be normal like everybody else. And in this normality, which is overwritten by whiteness, you are drowned out. You are further made invisible. But if there is a special focus to say, oh, let's focus on so-called Black issues, you then become the thorny exception who is this person who's bothering us, really, because normal society seems to be working really okay until we brought up this stuff. So I'm wondering, within the context of Germany, what does it mean to have a normal society? Not even to be a normal Black person, but what does the future of this country look like within the context of redefining normality for this society?
Yeah, I wonder the same. Do you want me to predict the future? because I look at it quite negatively, to be honest. I don't see us, I mean, I see progress here and there, and it's only due to the people who fight for it. People always say like, oh, time has changed, so it became different. No, time doesn't do a thing, the people did it. And I see all back into history, but also now really strong people fighting for a Black normality, or just a normal society. Personally, I don't want to paint it so negatively, but I don't see it coming. We have more and more problems with turning to the extreme right in Europe, in Western countries, in Germany. So I don't see it coming, but I wished for. Yeah, actually, I went to New York for the first time very late in my life because I grew up poor and we didn't travel. Also, we didn't travel in the GDR, but it's a different story. But I had this exchange year in New York at Princeton University, but I lived in New York. It was in 2016. That was my first time. And that was the first time, and I don't want to paint New York as the holy grail of being normal, but that was the first time in my life I experienced walking on the street, just feeling normal, not looked at strangely, not othered by gazes, just normal. And it was such a relief. And it was like, wow, other people feel like that? Wow, feels like vacation. Yeah, I don't see it for Germany. I hope for it. Yeah. Did it answer your question?
Thank you. Yes.
Want to add some comments? I have both. One concrete question about the future. I would love to learn how you want to work on your project in the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Like, what do you have in mind? And one comment we mentioned, I have pages already, and I think if you need something to read now, that it's enough for the whole part. There's a book called Schatzkirchen Art, which is a very, very good book about the so-called German reunification. And I think in discussions, we always said a very important thing, the neo-Nazis really wants to do the reunification. So it's a very important book about what happens in the 1989, 1990, and the following years. It's translated into Greek, into English, into all other languages, and you get a book. And also my question, what's happening to you, to the project, and then in the weeks to come? We would love to learn when we think about the research, what we have in mind.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can also recommend Mania's book. It's amazing. I'm working on 4 larger projects at the moment, actually. 2 books, 2 films. I work on 2 documentary films along with my co-director, Yasha Hanufa, and they are all in the cosmos of Black East German history. 2 documentaries, one for Arte, ZDF Arte, but we are working on an international cinema release as well. That is about the 2 visits of Angela Davis in the GDR, 1972, 1973, explored through the eyes, perspectives of Black East Germans. So we locally, we want to tell also a Black East German history by that, and bring more visibility to Black East German perspectives. That is one thing. Another documentary is actually about the 2 roles, or the roles of the 2 Germanys in South Africa, in apartheid system South Africa. But I have a very personal approach to this film because, like I said, like I mentioned, my father came from South Africa as an ANC member to the GDR. And they are still former ANC and MK members living in Germany who came to the GDR, and we explore this geopolitical story through very personal stories of the people. That are the two films, and I'm working on a novel, which is an autofiction about my story, but also includes tons of stories of people of color in the GDR from 1980 till the early 2000s. So it explores a world unseen so far, like immigrant stories, the immigrant underground of the GDR, and it really explores this world and brings visibility to many stories, which I love, but through an autofiction. And I work on an edited volume along with scholar Dr. Katharina Warda from Kentucky University, which is about, it's an academic edited volume. It includes perspectives of color on the GDR and East Germany today. So it is same one. I'm a one-trick pony. No, it's a huge cosmos, and there's so many stories to tell. And I feel so privileged and dedicate my work to tell the stories, which are so worth to tell and can tell us so much more about the present as well and about Germany. Yeah.
Wow.
So thank you very much.
Thank you again for the time, for sharing all of that. If you want to then come back, then some of this is done, I think it's please come back. Now we want to be together to celebrate you, taking as a civilized and as the next day, we want to be here in person, but it's not fixed. So we're going to listen and potentially done. And I want to thank on behalf of the Cluster of Excellence, the beautiful team who organized all of that. Thank you for helping us. Thank you. We have the core work and to thank you to Katharina Warda for the Okwui Enwezor lecture 2024.